Tim Lee lost his legs in Vietnam, but found his calling to serve God. Today, we will hear Tim Lee's dynamic story of how God saved his life and his soul.
Stories are important. All through the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, we find stories of great men and great women who love God. Their stories are recorded in this book right here. It all started with Adam. Did you men ever stop to think what it would have been like to have been Adam? Adam had a wife and never had a mother-in-law. That's a story. But Adam had a story, and Noah and Abraham, Moses had stories, Joshua and Isaac, and David and Samuel and Daniel and Shadrach had stories, Elijah, Samson, Jonah, Nehemiah, Stephen, John, Zacchaeus, Peter, John, and Paul. There's a whole chapter in the book of Hebrews we oftentimes refer to as the faith chapter. And in that faith chapter, there's one man after the other listed there because of their great faith stories. But did you know that right in the middle of all these great men, there's a woman by the name of Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute. Rahab was a harlot. And yet there comes a day in her life when she too puts her faith and her trust in God. And God thinks so much of her faith that he puts her in the faith chapter. Wow. I'm talking to someone right now and you feel like that you have blown it. You've messed up. You've shipwrecked. And you're thinking there's no way that I can have a story. But I've got some good news for you today. Two things. Number one, you're in this building breathing air. That means you're alive. And number two, my God is a God of a second chance. And sometimes a third, and sometimes even more, as some of us can testify. When you go out to the cemetery and you see a headstone, there's enough information on that headstone. We know something about the person that is buried in that particular spot. We know their name, of course. And then maybe there's a favorite Bible verse or something about their military career or something about their family. But then there's always the dates. There's the date that the person was born, and then there's the date that they died. But ladies and gentlemen, more important than the two dates, in between the two dates is the little dash. And it's what's on your dash that matters the most. What happened from the time that you took your first breath and to the moment that you took your last breath? That's your story. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7, and there was war in heaven. There will be another war in chapter number 19, and that will be the war that ends all wars. But this is not that war. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. And neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Now the question is, how would they overcome the accuser? The one that in verse number 9 is referred to as the great dragon, the old serpent, the devil, and Satan. How would they overcome him? And a more pertinent question here on April the 21st, 2024 is, how are you and I going to overcome this same accuser? This great dragon, this old serpent, the devil and Satan, how will we overcome him? And the very next verse tells us, are you ready? Here it is, verse number 11. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. What's your testimony? What's your story? I was raised in a pastor's home. My father was a Baptist pastor for almost 60 years. You imagine that? He lacked just a few months, being 6 full decades of pastoring and preaching the Word of God faithfully. He was my mentor. I miss him every day. My dad was one of the hardest working men I've ever known in my life. Before he became a full-time pastor, he was what we call a bivocational pastor, and he would get up early in the morning to go drive a school bus. He would come home from driving that school bus and change clothes, and he would go roof houses. One of the hardest working jobs that any man can do, roofing houses. And then he would come home and change clothes, and then he would go drive the bus again in the afternoon. And then he would go make hospital calls and visits to people that were having troubles and problems. And then he would study for his message on Sunday morning, his message on Sunday night, and his teaching on Wednesday night. He's a hard-working man, and he loved God, and he never wavered. Had a family of 7 to take care of, and he accepted that responsibility. My mom went to heaven after my dad, so that means my mom was a pastor's wife for almost 60 years. One of the godliest women I've ever known, and one of the hardest working women I've ever known. Taking care of a family of 7, cooking and washing and ironing and sewing and taking care of her family. And when she was 91 years old, she was still mowing her yard with a push mower. I'm not talking about the kind you put the handle down and it takes off. I'm talking about a real push mower. She called me one day and she said, son, she said, I just wanted to tell you that I sold my car. I was shocked. She drove herself everywhere, and she was a good driver. And I said, Mom, why did you sell your car for? She said, I'm 91. I've never had an accident. I've never had a ticket, and I want to go out on top. I couldn't say that when I was 17 years old. But do you know what you do when you're raised in a pastor's home? You go to church. You go to church all the time. I told a group of kids the other day, I was on drugs when I was 9 years old. Mom and Dad drug us to church Sunday morning. They drug us back Sunday night. And every time the doors were open, we went to church. You want to know something, parents? That was a good thing. It didn't hurt us one bit. And parents, I want to say to you today, your children need to be in church. They need to start out in church. I hear pastors, and I read on Twitter and on Facebook, they'll say something like this, and I mean their good intention. I understand what they're saying, but they say on Sunday morning church attendance is a Saturday night decision. Well, we didn't have to make decisions on Saturday night. It was already made for us. We just knew come Sunday morning we were going to the house of God. And that's the way it's supposed to be. There's a lot of young adult parents here. I've got a couple verses for you. This is for the young adult parents here today. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse number 5, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. Verse number 7, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. What are you talking about? The word of God. When are you talking about it? When you sit down, when you rise up, when you go by the way. And who are you talking about it to? To your children. Parents, as important it is for your children to be in church and to be in Sunday school and a Awana program or even a Christian academy, all that's great and all that's wonderful. But listen, it's not their primary responsibility to teach your children the Word of God. It's your responsibility to teach your children the Word of God. And that's the kind of home that I was raised in when I was only 10 years of age. The greatest thing that would ever happen in my life happened when I was 10 years old. Sunday morning, North City Baptist Church, Southern Illinois, North City, Illinois. I'm sitting on the second row and on the right side. And that morning, during the message, I get under conviction. I don't know whether you understand conviction or not, but the best way I can explain it in a sentence or so is that it's when God himself comes to you and starts talking to you personally about big stuff like life and death and heaven and hell and eternity. And when conviction comes to you, when God's been talking to you, especially in a setting like we're in right now, if conviction comes to you today while I'm speaking, you will probably be the most miserable person in the room. You're going to want the preacher just to shut up. No more singing. Somebody help me. Get me out of here. But friend, let me tell you, if conviction does come to you today, do you know what you ought to do? You ought to thank God for it. You know what it means? It means God loves you. It means this one true and holy God wants to have a personal relationship with you. It means he wants you to spend all of eternity with him in this beautiful, awesome place called heaven. And when I was 10 years old, conviction came to my life. It really got bad when the invitation started. And all I could see was hell. My dad was saved, my mom was saved, my sister was a Christian, and all I could see was hell. Somebody said, well, you shouldn't get saved just to stay out of hell. Maybe not, but that's not a bad reason to get saved. And I left my seat that morning, and I knelt at an altar. My mom came and knelt beside me as a 10-year-old boy. I repented of my sins, received Jesus Christ as my own personal Savior, and I got born into the family of God. And ladies and gentlemen and young people, I'm here to tell you today that is the greatest thing that has ever happened in my life. And if you've been saved, that is the greatest thing that has ever happened in your life. But I got to be up front with you today. If you've never been saved, if your life has never, ever been changed by the power of God, then your life is incomplete. You may be the richest person in this room today. You may have more money than all the rest of us put together, but if you don't know Jesus, your life is incomplete. You may be the most educated person in this room. You may be the smartest person in this room, but if you don't know Jesus, then your life is incomplete. You may be the strongest man in this county. You may be the most beautiful woman in this county, but if you don't know Jesus, then your life is incomplete. Today, you need Jesus. I was excited. I told my family and friends what had happened in my life, but then when I became a teenager, something else happened in my life. It never happened overnight, but rather gradually, I started to put things before God. Football, basketball, baseball, track and field. These things soon became my God. Sports became my God. And my dad told me more than one time, Tim, there's nothing wrong with you playing ball unless you put it before God. And then it's wrong. And I didn't want to listen to that. And little by little, I started putting these things before God in my life. And when I did, I began to have problems in my life. I began to rebel. I rebelled at school. I rebelled against God. I rebelled against mom and dad. You say, Tim, what did your parents do when you rebelled? Well, they had never read any of Dr. Spock's books on child psychology. They didn't even know who the dude was. And he actually believed that if a child was frustrated, whatever to get the frustration out, let him do it. If he wanted to pick up a rock and wanted to throw it through the window, let him throw the rock through the window. That'd help him get his frustration out. Well, my dad had other ways of getting that frustration out. We lived on a farm for a while, and behind the farmhouse was a willow tree. Now, I don't know whether you know what willow trees are good for or not, but you don't get any fruit off of them. They're not even a good shade tree. The only thing they're good for is to get a switch off of. And the only praying I did back then was for that tree to die. It never did die. And man, sometimes I'd have to go out and get my own switch. I'd be hurting before I got back because I knew what was about to happen. And they would always talk to us before they spanked us. And they'd say something like this. They'd say, They say, Tim, this is going to hurt me a whole lot worse than it's going to hurt you. I thought, isn't that dumb? If you'll give me that switch, I'll show you who it's going to hurt the worst. I said many times, even before I joined the Marine Corps, that I served under the stars and the stripes. My dad furnished the stripes, I saw the stars. They believed in old-fashioned discipline, but many times I would slip out behind their back to do what I wanted to do. I attended a public school. Most of my friends were not saved. Most of their parents were not Christians. And I made up my mind I could do what I wanted to do, and I began to run further and further away from God. My junior year, I set track records in the long jump and the hurdles, winning ribbons and medals, but all the time further and further away from God. You say, well, what did God do? God declares in Revelation chapter 3 and verse number 19, he said, as many as I love. Wait a minute. Listen to those words again. Revelation 3:19, this is God saying these words. He said, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. 5 of my high school friends were killed in car wrecks. Every time I would see one of them in a casket, I knew that it very easily could have been me. And God would speak to my heart, but I wouldn't listen. I kept running. I kept rebelling. I graduated from high school. I started college of the day, working nights. But in the meantime, my life became one disaster after the other. And I didn't think it could get any worse. But I ended up getting fired from my job. I ended up getting kicked out of college. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, and my life full of confusion. Walking down the street in my hometown, McLeansboro, Illinois, I went by the post office and I noticed a sign. Now, I'd seen this sign before, but it never got my attention the way it did that day. It was a picture of a young man in a sharp-looking uniform. At the top of the sign, it said, the Marines are looking for a few good men. I was so full of myself and so egotistical, I went in and told those recruiters that I had found what they were looking for. Now, young people, to be real frank with you, I was tired of living at home. I wanted a change. I wanted something different. I was tired of being told what time to go to bed and what time to get out of bed and how to get my hair cut and what I could do and could not do. So I joined the United States Marine Corps. Yeah, that wasn't the smartest thing I ever did. They put me on a Greyhound bus and sent me to Parris Island, South Carolina. I got off that bus and stepped out of those yellow footprints, and I met the guy they called drill instructor. And I was there less than 24 hours when I decided I didn't like him and he didn't like me. But the real reason why I didn't like him, he was in authority. And I didn't like authority. I was rebellious toward all authority. But I was soon to discover that no matter where I would ever go in this life, there would always be authority, with God being the supreme in all authority. I laid awake nights, many nights, platoon 305, thinking about my life, the shame and the disgrace that I brought to my dad's ministry, to my own family. My attitude began to change in boot camp. The Marines had some things to help it change. I graduated from boot camp with a meritorious promotion, private to private first class with the ITR, then the engineering school at Camp Lejeune, graduated with another meritorious promotion, private first class Lance Corporal, and then I received my orders. I was to go to South Vietnam. I had 3 weeks leave. I went home to Southern Illinois and spent those 3 weeks with Mom and Dad. On Sunday, before I was to leave on Monday, I went to church with my parents. And that morning, I seriously thought that I had made things right with God. On Monday, Mom and Dad drove me to St. Louis. I got on that plane that no more got off the runway. And I basically told God I couldn't do it. Those men were Marines. I was afraid they'd laugh at me. I was afraid they'd make fun of me. I went to Vietnam. I was there for 9 months. And I didn't go back to doing a lot of the things that I had done before, but friend, listen to me. If you're not for the Lord, then you're against him. For the believer in this room today, for the Christian in this room today, there is no middle ground. Today, you're either helping the cause of Christ or you're hurting the cause of Christ. I had opportunity after opportunity to live for God. Mom sent me a Bible. On the front flyleaf of that Bible, she wrote me several things and some particular verses. And then the last thing she wrote to me, she said, Tim, this Bible can keep you from sin, or sin can keep you from this Bible. I put it in the bottom of my footlocker. Had no prayer life, had no testimony. There's a black Marine in my squad by the name of Lee Gore. Lee and I flew to Vietnam on the same plane. We were the best of friends. He was a Christian living for God. I was saved, but I was running from God. Many times I watched as he sat down the edge of his rack and read his Bible, openly witnessed and talked to other Marines about the Lord. And I knew this was the story, this was the life, this was the testimony that I was supposed to have. But I wouldn't do it. I kept running from God. 30 days left in Nam, and my top sergeant offered me a desk job. A desk job was coveted. It simply meant that you were a short timer, you were getting ready to go back to the States, and if you took the desk job, the odds were great that you weren't going back out to the bush. And that was where the primary danger was. But for some reason, I told my top that I'd rather spend the rest of my time with my own men. I was told to take them on a mine sweep. I had been on a lot of mine sweeps. The only thing particularly different about this one was that some of my men were fairly new in Vietnam. Some only been there a few weeks, a couple just a few days. I got my men together early that morning, March the 8th, 1971. I told them that I would walk point man that day. Point man was the first man in the squad, 15, 20 meters at another Marine, 15, 20 meters at another Marine, and we'd be staggered out in that kind of formation. Normally, I would have been in the back of the squad with the railman, the corpsman, and the lieutenant. Wasn't trying to be a hero or anything like that, simply especially for the sake of the newer men to walk point. A lot different walking a mine sweep in Vietnam than it was in the training that you got back in the States. We walked that morning without any trouble. We found a couple of rounds, we detonated them. We stopped at noon hour to eat. While I was eating, my friend, Lee Gore, asked me if I wanted him to take over at point. Lee could have very easily have done it. He was as well trained as I, but for some reason, I told him I would finish the day. And then the next day, he would walk point. So we picked up where we left off from, and 45 minutes later, I stepped on a 60-pound mine. It blew me several feet into the air. It ripped both of my legs off of my body. I should have been killed instantly. It was a big enough mine to destroy a Jeep. We had entered a major minefield. At the very exact moment that I stepped on a mine, a South Korean Marine that was serving with us stepped on a mine, lost one of his legs. Our bulldozer driver set his blade down on a mine, and now there's noise and smoke and chaos and confusion, and I'm in extreme pain. I was only unconscious for a couple of minutes. I realized that I'd been hit. I didn't know how serious it was. But in the midst of all this confusion and in the midst of my hurt, I looked up, my head was laying in the lap of my best friend, Lee Gore. Lee wasn't cussing the president or the communists or the Vietnamese or no one else, but rather a tear streaming down his face, openly, out loud praying and asking God to help me. And I can remember today as though it happened 5 minutes ago. Quang Nam province, a little after 1:30 in the afternoon, I prayed. I made God a promise. It was something like this. I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like this. God, if you'll let me live. I want to live. I didn't want to die. If you'll let me live, I'll do with my life what you want me to do. Well, I had made so many promises to God on so many other occasions, but I never meant it like I meant it that day. It came with a medevac chopper, carried me to the hospital ship, the USS Sanctuary. The second day I was on that ship, 2 naval doctors pretty much gave up hope. Infection had set in, run a high degree temperature, a lot of complications. One of those doctors was Dr. Robert Bailey. He and I were reunited in Garland, Texas years ago, and he told 1,000 people that night that they didn't think that I was going to live because of the seriousness of my wounds. But God had a plan for my life. I lay for 2 weeks on the hospital ship. They took me to the island of Guam, where I spent the next 2 weeks. I was unconscious most of that time. I weighed 187 pounds before I was hit. The island of Guam, I weighed a little less than 80 pounds. During that first 4-week period, Mom and Dad received visits from the Marines, the Red Cross, and numerous telegrams and from all that they had been told. They never expected to see their oldest son alive again. But God had a plan for my life. They brought me back to the States, to the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, where I spent the next 8 months, 8 long months, surgery after surgery after surgery. When the doctors were finished, when the surgeries were over, I had 3 inches remaining on my right leg, 11 inches on my left, but no other part of my body was hurt. Now, some would tell us today that it was nothing more than an accident. But I remind you, friend, that with God, there are no accidents. God was not asleep on March the 8th, 1971. You see, as a 10-year-old boy, I said yes to Jesus. But as a teenager, I decided that I could live my own life. And I made a choice, a deliberate choice to run. And I ran and ran and ran until March the 8th, 1971. When the running was over. I went home from the hospital to my dad's church in southern Illinois. I went forward, and I was a prodigal son come home. And I asked the church for forgiveness, and of course they forgave me. It was in that church that I met Connie, and we fell in love with each other, and were soon married. And it wasn't long after we were married that God called me to preach. Imagine that, a Marine in a wheelchair with no legs. And God called me to preach. Friends and even some relatives tried to discourage me. They said it'd be so hard, so difficult. But I said, if that's what God wants me to do, then that's what I'll do.
Thanks for joining with us today, and we hope this message made a difference for you. If you'd like more information about today's message or Lewis Memorial Baptist Church, feel free to contact us. We love to hear how this ministry is helping you in your daily walk.